Hi, and welcome to Wisdom of the Mystics. I'm Laura Topper, and this is Reverend
Kathy Mastroianni with the Science of Mind Archives, and we're so grateful that you are here.
Yes, this is the first broadcast where we are inviting our very, very special super guest on to Wisdom of the Mystics today to talk about Dr. Ernest Holmes. And I just feel really excited right now because I know who this super guest is, and I'm just going to pass this over to Reverend Kathy to introduce this amazing person that's here to start this series of Wisdom of the Mystics here on New Thought Media Network.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. And as you're saying, so Ernest Holmes, what a wonderful first mystic as a foundation for this show. And our super guest is truly an expert on Dr. Ernest Holmes. He has written The Essential Ernest Holmes. He also has a brand new book out called More Than We Seem, based on all of his columns in Science of Mind magazine. He's been in the movement for so many years. And he's also a very special volunteer of the Science Mind Archives. He's our research expert. So people send us questions and I send it to him. So I look good, but we're so grateful for him and his wisdom. And so without further ado, I'd love to introduce Rev Dr Jesse Jennings. The crowd goes wild.
Yes. Welcome, Dr. Jesse.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you so much, Reverend Kathy. It's great to be with you. When you emailed me about this, talking about Ernest Holmes, that's completely in my wheelhouse. So I'm happy to share with you my thoughts on him and his life and his impact on my life.
Yes. What I find reading your biography on your website for your Creative Life Center for Spiritual Living, and what really amazed me and what I love about you, Dr. Jesse, is that you have been a practitioner. You were first a practitioner, when you were 20 years old, and you have stayed. You started one group and you've stayed with what you're doing. And we have these questions for you. What was Ernest really like as a person? And I think you are the person to answer that question right now.
Well, thank you.
I'm really pleased that you're here. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually was a practitioner at 28. I came into this at 20. And my family had been involved in this for some years before that in New York City, where I grew up. And when you're a kid and your family's into something, you're not. Whatever it is, you reject it, I think. That's probably not universal, but it was true in my case. And so it took me a few years to come around to the idea when I rediscovered it on my own with a friend my own age. And then I got involved in the studies and so on. Now, I did not personally know Ernest Holmes. I was 5 years old when he passed. Mm-hmm. For somebody who knew him, you'll want Dr. Marilyn Leo and others, But when I first walked into a CSL center, and at the time they were called religious science churches, the message, the first time I walked in there under my own accord, let me put it that way, I heard a teaching that at the time did not seem relevant to where I was in my life, because they were talking about prosperity. And when you're 20, especially in the mid 70s, it's not on your radar. But there was something back of that message that was getting itself across. And bear in mind, too, that everybody in the room was at least twice my age, except my friend who brought me. And there was something back of it that was informing the usefulness of prosperity, or the application of healing, or some function, or some practice in your life. It was a worldview. It was that mystical worldview. So I fell in love with the teaching, and yes, I've been with it ever since. And I started a study group, and then the group grew, and I had a decision to make about, did I want to do this part-time or full-time? And it was really no question. And so it led to ministerial school, and I've been a minister 37 years, almost 37 years now. And but to Ernest, you asked me who Ernest was as a person. So this is second and third hand what I'm going to tell you, because as I say, I didn't know the man. But coming into this movement in the 70s, he had passed in 1960. And so there were many people who were his first generation of students who were active in ministry and teaching at the time that I got to know pretty well. And so I heard their stories about him, as well as, of course, the biography by his brother, and the reminiscence by Reginald Armour, and then his daughter Marilyn Leo wrote a reminiscence as well, and there's several other books out about him. But the impression that I get of the man was that he was absolutely, and I've been thinking about this since you asked me to do this. What is one word I can pick to sum him up? And the word is unaffected. He was he was absolutely, what you see was what you got. He had an ego, because everybody has an ego, but he burned off his false ego that many of us grow up with. And what you saw with him, I think, was just the truth of his own being. He had discovered something in looking through the literature of the world's religions, and he wanted the world to know about it. And he didn't want to get in the way of that transmission. And he was open to whatever the most expedient method was to get that word out, which initially for him was writing for publication, and then speaking as well. But when you speak, you have a finite number of people in the room. Of course, this is long before venues such as we're in now, and so in Southern California, he was speaking to large groups of people, but his books went ultimately to millions. And all through that, he seems to have had this kind of simplicity of character and straightforwardness and hesitancy about creating an organization, because he saw what organizations typically go through. They thrash around, they come off message, in trying to adapt to the needs and wants of the culture. That gave him some frustration later in life. In his day-to-day life, he was a very kind of mid-century ordinary guy. He smoked cigars, he drank wine, he liked to fish. He seemed to have he had a great marriage. He had wonderful friends. He was very generous to everybody. He was not at all jealous about intellectual copyright or proprietary ideas, as he put this stuff out. He encouraged his students to go where they would, based on their own affinities and interests and so on. And he delighted in the variety of teachings that came out that were still consistent with science of mind, but that were in the voices of all of these others that he had trained, and then the people they had trained, and so forth. So that's my take on him. And I don't want to make him out to be a saint, but nothing I have found, I've never heard anyone say anything negative about him, beyond the fact that he got a little frustrated later in life at where he saw the world heading. It wasn't healing as fast as he thought it should. Well, I get that, and I think you get that too. I mean, aren't we? Don't we sometimes wonder, are we getting there? And we who are in this teaching as leaders are reassuring people week in, week out. We're getting there. It may not look like it, but we're, love brings everything unlike itself up to be healed, as I think Terry Cole Whitaker said. And so that was, that's really the Ernest that I know. When I walked in that little church that day with my friend, I was met at the door by a greeter. In those days, men wore leisure suits, if you can imagine such a thing. Many of them did. And this guy, he's, oh, you know, and and when you're young, and this is probably still true, you know, you show up at one of our places, it's like, oh, great, they're young, you know, that we can put them, they can move furniture for us, you know, we can find stuff for them. To this guy, this greeter, he says, you know, we're the teaching founded by Ernest Holmes. Said, not you. And I said, who? And I was being glib because I had heard of him through my family, but had they not been involved with Dr. Barker and Dr. Grayson in New York, I wouldn't have known of him. And so that's been something that I've personally devoted myself to over the years, is publicizing the existence of this man in areas outside of formal New Thought. And that's why I created the book, The Essential Ernest Holmes.
And that's so powerful. We have to do that.
Yeah.
We have to do that, especially in countries outside of America.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Across the world. Yeah. I mean, the Yearbook of American and Canadian Religion, which is the standard go-to reference for spiritual organizations. I don't know as of right now, but as of 5 years ago, we weren't in it.
What's that book called?
The Yearbook of American and Canadian Religions or Religious Denominations or something to that effect. I don't have it. I just came up with that, so I don't have it written down here. But it's the, you know, the reference for this, if you will, industry. Like the Thomas Register used to be for mechanical industry. You know, it's the reference book. And I want to say 5 years ago, ballpark, we were not in it. And they had groups in it that had 50 members. They had groups in it that had 200 members. That were splinter groups of splinter groups of splinter groups. And we were not in it, with our long history and our magazine being, and I say don't quote me on this, but here I go. I think it is the longest continually published spiritual periodical in at least North America, if not the world, since 1927.
I've heard that as well.
And we're not in this book.
Wow. That's amazing.
And we have to change that.
We have to change that. That's why we're doing this. That's why we keep writing and teaching and talking to each other and talking to the outside world. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And one of the things working at the Science of Mind Archives, we've been digitizing audio of Dr. Ernest Holmes. And so it's so neat to hear him, how he speaks. And I think like you had expressed, I mean, he's just so real. You know, he's so down to earth and he speaks his truth, you know, and I just love that about him. He's just, I mean, it's like you and me, you know, it's like each one of us. He makes this teaching so accessible. And that's why I think this show is really important. And for people who are in the studies of this teaching to learn about him. I mean, he's just he's a mystic. I mean, he's a mystic. So he's open to receive that mystical impressions of spirit, and it's pure. I mean, so how would you see Dr. Holmes as a mystic?
Well, to me, mysticism is like a channel you haven't watched yet. You know, or a streaming service you're not aware of. You have a friend come to you and they say, have you seen this movie? No, never heard of it. Well, it's on such and such a platform. Well, I've never heard of that either. Well, here, go to this link. And so you watch the thing and it's really good. And you get interested. And then you realize there are all sorts of other movies and shows and stuff on this service that you didn't know existed. And they're really good too. And off you go. And they've enriched your life in some way. Well, to me, we're all mystics in the sense that we have this channel within us, but most of us don't watch it. Most of us are busy paying bills. Most of us are busy getting the oil in the car changed and, you know, dealing with everyday life, making plans, having ambitions and goals and so on. And when we're quiet, it's a little disturbing, you know, and so we want the TV on, or we want something to stimulate us. Holmes believed in what David Bohm, the physicist, called the primacy of non-physical reality. Okay, it's one way to put it. Wow. May not be the best way to put it, but it's one way to put it. The primacy of non-physical reality, meaning that not only is there a non-physical reality, it is the source, if not the cause of physical reality. The cause of physical reality exists within a non-physical realm. That's why we do prayer. Prayer is not a physical act. It can have physical aspects, like you can do dancing prayer, body movement prayer, but the actual connection in prayer is achieved in consciousness. And so a mystic is somebody who recognizes this. And to me, the distinction between a practicing, let's call it a practicing mystic. So if we establish that we're all mystics, nascently, the difference between a practicing mystic and a metaphysician is the metaphysician believes in the existence of this non-physical realm, and the practicing mystic lives there, sees it, hears it, feels it. It informs what they do. When they get the oil changed, they're doing it from a standpoint in consciousness that's different than the person who's caught in the moment. It's like the old saying about enlightenment. Before enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water, and after enlightenment, you chop wood and carry water. And the distinction is that it's done from a different vantage point in consciousness now of this non-physical reality taking shape and taking form. So when you listen to Ernest, and especially when you watch him in that one film that we have, and there's a great backstory we don't have time for here, but it's a great backstory to that film that I have. But when you watch that, he goes from a very mystical, almost otherworldly sort of place in his delivery to talking about what happens when you eat a sandwich. He says, when you eat a sandwich, it converts itself into blood and tissue and muscle and bone. And we know this, but no one knows why. And that's the great mystery of life. So the practicing mystic is in love with the mystery of life. Ernest brought back a degree of certainty into you can be healed, you can be loved, you can be prospered, and yet back of that was this mystery of you are already one with the infinite. And all this is accomplishing is a manifestation, a demonstration, as he called it, of this reality in practical form. I love his words in the Sermon by the Sea, which he gave at Asilomar in the year before he left us, where he said that demonstrating a dime is good if one needs it, and demonstrating freedom from a pain is certainly good if one has it. But beyond all this, in the tabernacle of the Almighty, in the banquet hall of heaven, I think he said, there is something beyond anything you and I have touched. That's the mystic.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I think you touched upon it, but what would you say is Dr. Holmes' main teaching?
Oneness, and manifesting as manyness, the ubiquity of spirit. Spirit is all there is. This non-physical realm is all there is. It is intelligent. It is purposeful, but it's also not interfering. You and I have free will. We can doubt it. We can doubt ourselves. We can wall ourselves up. We can place ourselves in bondage to conditions, to appearances, and so on and so forth. But back of all of that is this absolute limitless freedom that's ours to claim. I think that was a large part of his teaching. And then the application of that to the needs and wants of people today. In his day and in our day, and the needs in his day were more similar than they're not to the needs in our day. People wanted to know how they could be happy, how they could fall in love, how they could get a better job, how they could be healed of a pain that they had, and probably most of all, I guess, is how they could have purpose and meaning in their lives through all of that. A context out of which to operate. And so he offered this context, and I'm going to anticipate another question that you have for me, because you gave it to me beforehand, and kind of bleed over into that about what did he discover? What he discovered, and he wasn't the only one by a long shot to discover this, but he was a popularizer of it, was the fact that this idea, the primacy of non-physical reality we've talked about, runs through every faith system on earth. And he was unafraid to go look at other faith systems, because he had been raised in a very tolerant, open, loving household where there was no shame attached to reading the works of other cultures and other times that were non-Judeo-Christian. And so he brought that back, and he said, oh, look here, it says here and it says here, and what if we apply that? And it is, he maintained that religion, which he had an iffy relationship with the concept of religion, but he maintained that religion was a story that people make up to explain and ultimately codify what they experience as a practicing mystic, what they experience in themselves. They'll say, so somebody has an experience out on a hilltop, and they see the heavens open, and they see the oneness of all life. Now they have to explain that. They have to come back to the group, and they're profoundly altered. And so they have to explain this to other people. And the other people who kind of buy in all go to that hilltop, and they all stand there waiting for something to happen, as though it were happening from outside themselves. A few of them open their hearts to it and have the experience, and the others who don't, who aren't ready to do that yet, say, well, the hilltop doesn't work for me, so I'm going to try the seashore. I'm going to give up on the idea altogether. But everybody ultimately gets there. And they get there through their cultures, and they get there through their stories. And he had a way of bringing all of this about that paid respect and honor to these different stories. He didn't try to twist them, which bothers me when this happens, when you'll see somebody say, oh, the Hindu have a trinity, so it's like the Christian trinity. Let's overlay it. No. It's different energies, a whole different point, a whole different message is being communicated. We need to take the time to learn that. So his message was, you are that, you are that, you are the one, you are beautiful and wonderful, and there's a power for good in the universe greater than you are, and you can use it, and at the same time it's using you, because you are the experience that Spirit is having in this world at this time by means of you. And that's a powerful idea. It's also an humbling idea. And I think this is where you come to the idea that he burned off his false ego, and if he ever had one, I suppose he did, and came to this very, very calm and peaceful place within himself, is the recognition that while on the one hand, we're all, if you'll pardon the expression, God, having that experience, at the same time, we are small and live in mystery and don't understand an awful lot of what's going on, and probably never will. And so all we can do is stand in awe of that.
Wow. This is amazing. There's so much information that you're sharing, and I could unpick all of that for about another 4 hours, but I can't, because we're here for another 25 minutes or so, and I know that Rev Kathy could probably also do the same thing. So we'd be here for about 4 hours.
Or days, or months. Have an Ernest fest.
So because there is that, there's that other question that we really want to ask you, but maybe we could just put another question in before that, or another kind of observation here, because for me, as I know that you are you write very regularly for the Science of Mind magazine, and you're a huge inspiration of the magazine, as an editor as well of the magazine. And I'm just wondering, how did Ernest find time for all of this? How did he find time to write so prolifically, and to then go and talk so prolifically, and to travel and teach and train ministers and train practitioners and give his sermons? And how did he time manage that one? Because for all of us, I know how difficult it is to even, for me, the thought of writing a book would be, whoa, that's going to take a year or 2 or 3. How did he do that?
Well, this last one I did took a year, and it was already written.
Right.
So all I had to do was edit the stuff over the past 30 years, and it still took a year. So I totally get the question. I have to. I'm laughing because you mentioned my work, and I'm senior minister of a very active spiritual center with those duties. And so the writing that I do and the editing that I do has to come second to the people who have been kind enough to have me as their minister for all of these years. What Ernest did is he threw himself into the writing and the teaching and all full time. And I think that it was the development of the organization. If it caused him some frustration, it was because it took him away from that. He would have preferred to be, doing, and that's the thing. It's like you two were so kind to invite me on to say some words with you, but you don't understand. I mean, I live for this. When I have an opportunity to teach science of mind, I live for that. That's really what I feel like I came to this world to do. And I learned so much. So Ernest learned everything. I mean, from childhood up, he was just hoovering up information. His parents had a Bible and I think Emerson's essays in the house, one or two others. They were basically a farm family, and he had an incredible work ethic. Let's start there from childhood. I grew up in New York City, but we had friends and relations up in New England on farms, particularly one in Vermont. And these people work all the time. They were dairy farmers, but they did seasonal work, logging, tapping maple trees, clearing roads, doing all this, as well as working in the mills, in the quarries when they needed extra money. The people on the coastline, this in England, the fisher folk. Oh my God. I mean, and they're at the mercy of the elements and all of this. So Ernest, I don't think he ever had a lazy moment in his life. He took time off, but even then he was investigating and exploring and striking up conversations with strangers, which he loved to do.
Right.
So how he managed to do this a lot, some people were generous with him and allowed him, funded him in some way to be able to do the work that he did. He made money from his books. Starting with Creative Mind, not a vast fortune, but enough for him to live comfortably in those days. And so he just went from place to place doing what he most loved to do. And that gives him credibility when he tells me or tells you or tells the reader today, your life can be the way you envision it being. If this man had been frustrated and tormented his whole life, and it'd be like, well, okay, and there are mystics who have been for other reasons. Some of this, I suppose, you have to write up to luck or the timing or the culture being ready for it, or all, because a lot of people who taught similar things several hundred years before went to the stake, and we can't say, well, they had a breakdown in consciousness. No, it's way more complicated than that to tie people to their outcomes. But he made time for what he loved doing. And there's a go ahead, please.
I was just thinking as you were saying that, and I know Rev Kathy has a question. It's just he gained a momentum, so he had the support as well, which must have really kind of given him that rocket fuel.
Yeah, and he was good. Yeah. He was good. Let's bring that in there too. He was I think, this is my opinion, he was a better speaker than he was a writer. He needed editing as writing, but when you read his later works that are transcriptions of his talks and classes, they're brilliant. He was quick on his feet, but I think he was one of these people who, when they sit down to write, they think they have to write in a different voice. Well, now I'm a writer. Now I have to be a philosopher. Now, and so it gets a little bit stilted. Some folks have difficulty with the Science of Mind textbook and some of the other, the earlier works. But he was really good at what he did. He could hold, as you've seen from that video, he was not a gigantic, he didn't look like Billy Graham. He didn't present himself on stage, great leonine hair and a deep thunderous voice. His he was a very ordinary looking individual. He wore kind of a baggy suit in that film, and he just got up there and delivered the goods, and people were hypnotized within minutes at what this man was saying. He had the elocution training, and you hear some of that Boston sort of delivery, quality of delivery, when he's thinking to do it. And then he falls out of that kind of into the vernacular, you know, when he's speaking, as he's warmed up to his audience. But he was really good, so it made him popular. People wanted him to. I think it was a Julius Seton Sears, I think, sponsored the big speaking tour that he and Fenwick had up and down the East Coast, and
right,
folks just couldn't get enough of him.
Wow, I want him here now.
Oh, right. And we happen to have, so there's the Ernest Holmes Papers that's also on Amazon. And this is what Dr. Jesse was just talking about, is it was transcribed. So it was the last years of his life when George Bendel lived with him after Hazel passed on. And there's a little story in the very beginning that George was getting in the car with Ernest to go to one of his talks. And he said, wait 1 minute, I'll be right back. And Ernest's like, where are you going to go? I'm going to get paper and pen. He goes, why? Because I want to write down everything you say, Ernest. He goes, I'll have my secretary, Helen, write it for you. And George is like, yeah, right. It's not going to happen. And sure enough, a few days later, under his door was slid the transcript of the talk. And so George just kept them one after another and put it into, this is the 3 volumes of Philosophy of Ernest Holmes, The Anatomy of Healing Prayer and Ideas of Power. The first one you can't find. It's like over like $200 on Amazon, but it's right here for less than $20. And it's the last years of Ernest Holmes' wisdom. And so it's really a neat, sweet resource.
That's exactly right. 2 more, if I may, the seminar lectures and the Beverly Hills lectures. Also, Can We Talk to God, which was the Ebel lectures given at the Wilshire Ebel Club. These are transcriptions, not messed with too much, that really give you a sense of being in the room with him, make him very accessible. And plus, he had a hard job. I mean, you try to explain that. I've spent a career, and so many of us have, trying to explain the science of mind, trying to simplify the science of mind for the newcomer. How do I apply this? And much of what we teach seems like counterintuitive, because we say the essence of the universe is perfect. The essence of the universe is godly and whole. And most of us have not been taught that. Many of us have been taught quite the opposite, since the beginning. So it's, yeah. And then he loved to talk to people. Like I said, he'd introduce himself to strangers. He'd ask them what they thought. Nobody seemed to be offended by this. And he learned about human nature by being around humans and finding out what made them tick and why they made the choices they did, and so on. So that gave him both credibility, and it gave him material.
Right. And since he was young, I mean, he was known as being very curious. He was the eternal question mark. He would just ask lots of questions. And just have an openness, right, to the answers, and to listen and to learn.
He absolutely did, and he seemed to walk into a lot of situations without a big preconceived notion or agenda. He writes about spiritualism. He writes about attending seances and about psychic phenomena. And he does this, and he's not at all tongue-in-cheek or, snarky about it. It's he said, well, I went to this, or it could be real. Could this other thing over here I'm not so sure about, but it was all very, very level and kind of affirming. If somebody attends my center, for example, on a Sunday, and they come up to me afterward and they say, well, you people were very nice and the coffee was strong and I enjoyed the music and so on, but I just really don't believe in what you're teaching. I have no problem with that. I mean, that's sweet and respectful, and then we're not the place for you. And you know what? Right next door, and certainly, within a mile radius, there are all these other faith centers teaching different things that you might like better. That's excellent. And yet somebody in Ernest's position is typically not going to do that. They're going to want to sell you this thing. Well, we can make this work for you. No, we can tailor it to your needs. He never sold out. That's something I love about the guy. The price we paid for that was that he was not famous and we're not in the yearbook of religion. I'm willing to have us pay that price for us to not sell out and just tailor the message to whoever wants it to look different than it does. So that gives me permission, and that's why I've kept teaching this all these years. Nobody from our headquarters has ever, and we've been through a lot of headquarters varieties over the years. Nobody has ever come in and said, well, we need to see the notes of what you're going to say on Sunday, or you went here, or you went there, and that's really not okay. And I realize that you can go completely off the rails, and maybe at some point somebody would need to step in, but the breadth of room that we're given is enormous, and I trace all that back to Ernest.
And that being open at the top, that's for me, that's not the tagline. I don't mean it's the tagline, but it is his motto, being open at the top, and that's our philosophy's way of being. And for him to be open at the top, to be able to embrace all of these different understandings of clairvoyance, psychic, whatever it was that he dipped into, he had to do that to be his own experiment, because otherwise he's just going to live a siloed life and not have anything to compare this to say it works, it doesn't work. He had to put himself out there. And I think somehow that we need to all be doing that, to question this all the time and not just accept that this is it.
Absolutely. That's what keeps us real. That's what, I wanted to bring up a couple other things real quick, if I may. One, having to do with his writing and teaching. One was, I'm using platforms like this lately to dispel a myth, which was that the 1938 edition of the textbook was snatched away from him. That he originally published in 26, and that 38 was snatched away and edited by somebody else without his permission. That is not true. And I've actually, Kathy can tell you, I've seen the 26 version with his pencil written revisions in it. What happened was some of this stuff on psychic phenomena and also on sex was pulled out of the 38 version so that it could be put in the home study course, where it has existed to this day, because it was felt like in anything, don't tell people everything you know in one book, or it turns into this 600-page, which it already was. It turns into 800 pages. It is. But he's got meditations. He's got meditations at the back. He's got some filler. He's got some diagrams, But it's like, let's wait. There's some things, just like in my teaching, I don't get up on Sunday and say absolutely everything. I say we'd be there for hours, plus which there's some things I want people to ask about, because not everybody's interested in it. And the people who are, well, then they can ask, and then we'll talk about that. And if need be, we'll create a class about that. So that was one thing, was that he had complete creative control over his own material from start to finish. If he had an editor, which he did, Maud Allison Latham for one, Alberta Smith for another, Willis Kinnear in the later books that came out, he gave them permission to do what they did, but it was always in concert with him. I forget now what the other thing was I was going to say, but anyway, let's go on.
Wow. So I just have to ask very quickly, then he took that out, not because he didn't believe in it, but because he wanted people to discover it further.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's in there. And
yeah.
The original home study course, and I don't know if the current home study course has all the material in it that the original one did. The original came in 3-hole punch in binders, I guess before that it was tied together with string, but the introductory letters to each lesson, this was a correspondence course, people received through the post, and the cover letters became the book Living the Science of Mind, the introductory little letters in there. So he held some things for the advanced student. When people came to him initially. He was speaking in these theaters and all, and they said, well, I would like to teach this. I would like to know more. I would like to go further with this. He used the Christian Science model of educating practitioners. That's why we call them practitioners. He got that from Christian Science that he briefly studied in Boston. And so trainings were set up that where people got information that the general public, it wasn't hidden from the general public, but it wasn't relevant to the general public. You know, if I'm not going to be a counselor, I don't need to learn counseling. But these others did. And there's a body of material. And Kathy, I've been meaning to ask you about this. Have you ever heard of the clinical course?
Yes, I have.
Do you have a copy of the clinical course in the archives?
I'm not sure because I think we had that discussion, but I'd like to find out about it to make sure.
I think I have one. And if I do, I'm going to get a copy and sent to you. It's a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox, you know, from back in the day. But this was the original second year of practitioner training. Comes from the what I have, I think, was from the 1940s. And all of it was a practicum.
Wow.
None of it was a lecture. All of it was, all right, you're sitting there and a person comes in and here's what's happened. What do you do? What do you ask them? What's the spiritual principle back of this? How do you begin to move the session along toward spiritual mind treatment? How do you follow up with them? And when you finish that, here's the next one. And it was like triage, you know? It's brilliant stuff. Absolutely remarkable. That he created with the help, I think, of Orrin Moen and some others, to educate people. But again, this is more, what do you call it? Inside baseball. This is more of, you have to ask for this, and there's certain prerequisites to get to the place where you learn these things.
See, and that would be fun for the archives to find because we're digitizing all those hidden treasures and making them available on our website.
Yes.
So I definitely want to find that feller. So
okay, let me dig in and I'll see what
nice.
I have that, and I can't have gotten rid of it, but I have a lot of stuff, so I think I know where to look.
So I think that's kind of a nice segue to about how Dr. Holmes' teaching is practical and applicable for people today. We've certainly touched upon it, but specific. So like our listeners here who are coming here is like, why should I care? How is this useful for me in my life?
Okay, well, first of all, I think if anyone who's watching this is or has been a practicing mystic, why else would they tune in? Of all the other available things you might be watching. So you're drawn to this. Maybe you're not drawn to Ernest Holmes specifically, but you're drawn to the idea of the primacy of non-physical reality. At the back of all of this, there is a field of consciousness out of which everything issues. This is practical and applicable because that has not changed, nor will it. Through all the millennia of earthly history, that has not changed. Nor has its capacity, this non-physical field, to manifest itself through us in the way that, as he said, a sandwich turns into muscle and bone. Ideas turn into things. Thoughts become things. Thoughts become things when they're empowered by emotion. Thoughts that are not empowered by emotion don't become things. They remain thoughts. They stay in the planning stages. But you have an idea and you get excited about it. Suddenly you take action and the universe takes action alongside you. And so other people and other ideas and materials and supplies and all kinds of stuff begin to show up. Synchronicities, serendipities, that kind of thing, you know? And so this is why it's practical and relevant today, is that if you're out there watching this and you're thinking, I need a better job than I have, for instance, you know, well, where am I going to find one? Well, I'm going to start in consciousness. I'm going to start with the idea that the right place, like Emerson said, a fit place and congenial duties, you know, exists for me already. And that I'm actually already there. I'm going to feel as though I'm already there because I'm getting excited about this idea. And the next thing, my phone's going to ring. Or I'm going to be inspired to go here or do that. And this is a question comes up relentlessly at this point is, don't I have to take action? Of course you have to take action, but you're going to want to take action. because this is your dream. And if you don't take action and you don't want to take action, it isn't your dream. It's somebody else's dream, right? You know, somebody tells you, oh, I know what you need to do, and you just can't get behind it. Well, then, you know, you're gonna postpone meetings, and you're gonna miss phone calls, and you're gonna sleep through the alarm clock and all the rest of it. But when it's really your passion, you're gonna hunt the thing down. And so that's the thing, is to start with the idea, start with the end in mind, as they say. Start with the idea of the reality as being already so, and that you're up to it, and you have what it takes, and whatever you don't seem to have, you're going to learn to have. See? And so if it takes learning a new skill, if it takes learning a new language, if it takes letting some things go, unlearning some things, this is a big point too. The way our self-esteem has been shaped from the cradle up. If it takes letting some of that go, you're going to be prepared to do it, because this is your dream, and it's calling itself to you. And so you live up to this. You become, you know, there's a term that's I don't know, it's kind of loaded, but to say somebody's a real pro, what that means is they put in the work and they show up. You know, if you want to be a musician, you learn how to read music, you play your scales over and over and over and over, so that when you get out on stage or into the orchestra pit, what the audience sees is flawless performance. And they make it look so easy, but it isn't easy, but it's worth it. I love that. I don't know where that expression came from. I just saw it recently as a meme. I do not say it will be easy. I do say it will be worth it. And that's spiritual development right there.
Yes. Wow. So I just would like to ask also, I know we have a few minutes left, and maybe you could just talk on this for a couple of minutes, because we are in a time that is very challenging. There's a demand on us mentally and emotionally to live in an experience that feels like it's unreal, and yet it's happening. And so many kind of, I was saying today, I feel like I'm living in a sci-fi movie when you hear the news and what's going on. How do you think what do you think Ernest would be doing right now? I know the answer to that, because you've just said, in consciousness, but yet this is very challenging for so many people.
It is, yeah, but no question. This is absolutely a turning point in human history. And yet we've said that at various times, this is a turning point in human history. And you look back at what was going on at that time, and you think, well, it only affected a small number of people here, that was traumatic. What he would be doing today, I believe, is dwelling pretty relentlessly on the idea of personal spiritual practice. You and I must go deliberately and immediately to that place in consciousness where nothing has ever been wrong, where there's never been a coronavirus, where there's never been racism, where there's never been homophobia, where there's never been global climate crisis, where there's never been hunger, poverty, crime, disease. The list goes on and on. Some things that seem to have recently developed, some things that go way, way back. There is a place in consciousness where these things not only have not occurred, they cannot occur, because they're out of alignment with the divine idea of all one. Right. Okay. Now, meanwhile, down here on earth, you and I can make foolish choices. We can act out of our pain. We can act obliviously, and harm each other and plot harm to each other. But at the same time, we can, by touching base in regular spiritual practice, forgive instead of avenge, bless instead of judge. We can make these, and the choices are situational and they're serial, because one condition after another comes up. Think about it in the course of the day, how many opportunities you have to judge. All I have to do is get in my car and get out on the road, and I got opportunities to judge, right? So he would say, take the time. And he didn't specify how. People want to know how long, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, twice a day. You'll find a path for yourself. But take the time to go to the place in meditation and prayer where nothing has ever been wrong. And just breathe in the I am. Just breathe in the I am. And that will inform your actions. That will inform your actions. I'm thinking here of something Gary Zukov said in his book, The Seed of the Soul, that has stuck with this wonderful book. This one thing has stuck with me all these years. He said, if you're driving, which where I live is a big deal because it's like LA or Denver. We have freeways and lots of traffic. Well, if you're driving and somebody cuts you off in traffic, the role in consciousness that you play to decide how to respond to that, is several. You can look at that and say, well, that person must be having an awful day. Something terrible's happened to them, that they wanted to take that out on me, or they weren't paying attention. He says, but there's another way. He says, maybe that person is having the best day of their life, and they've just received some news that's so exciting, that's so uplifting, that they just didn't see it. He said, you see, there's a difference between tolerance and grace. That's really the difference. Tolerance is, I don't like you, you're a pain, but I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to sit here and wait till you leave the room. And grace is, the worst about the other is that maybe they have yet discovered who they are. And it's come to them in a blinding flash, and it's, I don't know what to do with that. I remember now real quick the other thing I was going to say earlier, which is to dispel, and for your future guests on this, mysticism is not weird. It's not strange. It's not, you'll hear it used sometimes that way by people who don't understand the concept. A mystic is simply a person who's gazed into the infinite and said, that's home. That's where I belong. And I'm bringing home back with me into this environment, into my work, into my home.
Oh, I love that. Bring it home back with me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. My pleasure. Thank you both.
Isn't this exciting?
It's really exciting. And I feel like I know Ernest in such a beautiful way. I feel like my heart is opened from listening to you and just connecting with that mystical element that's within all of us. And so I love your passion and your wisdom. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, I love yours. And as I've told you face to face, I envy you. I mean, look at where she is right now. Or is that your home? I can't tell.
No, not in the office.
Okay, I can't tell. But she knows I want to bring a bedroll and a hot plate into the archives. Because to sit surrounded by all of that material, and she conducts me to the shelf, and she says, "These were Fred Vogt's books," and I'm like, "Oh my God!" Fred Vogt was at my ordination. I mean, Fred Vogt was a guest at our church 3 or 4 times over the years, and these are the books that he had in his library and on his bedside table, and I just lost my mind. And to sit in that environment, actually or virtually, day in, day out, oh, you have it good. You have it good. But you are doing such a service for the world by curating this material and keeping it safe for future generations. So God bless.
Thank you.
It's so powerful. And you have a course coming out, don't you, Dr. Jesse? Would you like to talk about it for a minute? It's a 10-week, it's so exciting 10-week course. I think I'd love to tune into that. If it was earlier in the day for me, I'd be there.
I tell you something, Laura.
Hint.
Well, they sent me the first list of enrollees, and it's being added to daily. We have a student in New Zealand.
Nice.
In Auckland, New Zealand. I have no idea what time it is for that person. It's probably the day before,
Yeah.
The last time we taught this, we had a student in Israel, in Jerusalem. It was 2:30 in the morning. I'm not putting you on the spot here. I'm just saying.
Okay.
It was 2:30 in the morning. And she ran to either end of the house for her Wi-Fi kept failing. And so she was running her iPad back and forth to the 2 different modems she had. Yeah, this is a course. It's a part of the certificated coursework of Centers for Spiritual Living. It's called The Essential Ernest Holmes. It's based on the book, and there's also a workbook that comes with it where we parse what's in the book and we go through the Declaration of Principles, also called What We Believe, which began as What I Believe. Ernest wrote in the 20s. And a lot of conversations, small group work, larger group work, a lot of Q&A, and a real bonding experience for these students, because the last course we had students from 20 U.S. states and 3 countries that would not otherwise have connected. And that's the beauty of this, I don't have to tell you, but the format that we're in here, where people around the world can connect and create relationships going forward. And some of them were going on into practitioner training, and others of them were brand new. They had just come across Ernest Holmes, and they saw it and they, well, let's find out what he's about. So a wonderful mix of philosophies and questions. So this starts on Tuesday, the 25th of January. It's 5:30 to 8 p.m. Mountain Time, U.S., 6:30 to 9 where I am, and so on. And there's that link, and that will take you to, and there are other courses as well, starting before and after it, offered by other teachers. They do this year round. Reverend Nicole and Reverend James, and the spiritual development function of our home office. It's a wonderful time, and it'll cost you about almost $30 a week, which is a small price to pay. It's a movie and some popcorn and parking maybe, and
life changing.
And it's life changing. It really,
Yeah.
it really is. It really is. So I hope you can join us.
And I was blessed. I took it over the summer with Dr. Jesse when he first did online. And oh my gosh, I was in heaven. And so I just really encourage folks who want to delve deeper into this mystic of Dr. Ernest Holmes to take it with the mystic, Dr. Jesse Jennings.
Thank you.
It's an amazing class. And we're so grateful. Thank you so much for being here with us.
My honor.
Delightful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for setting this series off in motion and bringing Ernest Holmes into our everyday reality and understanding. It's really amazing to hear so much about him, and I know that you have more. So we'll invite you back at some point.
I'd like that. Thank you.
Part 2.
And I'll be watching because I want to hear which other mystics get brought up and who has what to say about them.
Yes.
Because Ernest is front and center to me, but there are many inspiring individuals who've written and spoken over the centuries that I feast on, as all of us do.
Amazing. Well, thank you. That is
my
our
pleasure.
show, our first show for today for Wisdom of the Mystics. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone who came to watch it whenever you watch it. And we'll see you. We're the 2nd and 4th Tuesdays of every month, 1 p.m. Mountain. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
And stay tuned in to New Thought Media Network. This is an incredible focus ministry bringing shows and presentations and talks and teachings and education every day on this network to feed people's hearts, to feed your hearts, and to remind you of the truth of who you are. So we have a website here that you can go to if you feel like being a part of that by donating into the network. Then you can find the donate button there and support everything that the network is doing. And also Rev Kathy from Science of Mind Archives. I think I'll put your website up here because you have all of the links there for donating as well, don't you? On the website, if I can find it, Science of Mind Archives. Here we go.
Thank you.
There we are. Yeah. Until next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye.